default parameters before ES6 next generation JavaScript. So how the default parameters used to work and how the developer used to write some custom code to manage the default parameters, because from the version 6 ES6 onwards, directly we can mention inside the parameter itself and give the default values to our function parameters. Let's see how previous we used to manage it, and sometimes we also need to use the previous approach. So let me just create a simple function here. I'm going to create a traditional function. I'm not going with the complications of the anonymous function or maybe the arrow function, because here we want to more focus on the default parameters. So let's say on add, I want to create a function which can do the addition for the two numbers maybe. So we need to keep two numbers as a parameter. And here the problem is, let me just first get the results out of it. Results number one, number two, and a console of our results. Let's apply the prettier and call on add. Let's see the results here. So I missed giving inputs 1 and 3. This is 1 and this is 3. So we should be getting 4. Yes, we are getting it. Now the problem here, if instead of this 1, 3, if I just mention 1, what will happen in this case? I'll just take a pause for a second so that you can think on it. Yes, so we are in the JavaScript. So JavaScript will not give you any error like this function accepts two parameters. You're just giving one, because there is a huge discussion we need to do on the function behavior, parameter behavior, the the array-like object called arguments. Due to this, these functionalities are working in a bit different way in the JavaScript in the upcoming lectures. So even you're giving one parameter and your function is expecting two parameters, the calling is allowed. So this number two, what the value inside the number two, that's a question here in this case. So what I'll do here, I'll say console number one, console number two. Let's observe. Yes, we are getting one on the line number four, on the line number five, this. So it is giving us undefined. It means instead of giving us any error, instead of crashing the program, the JavaScript by default giving the undefined as a parameter to the second one. And now if you just give one plus undefined, so of course the results will be something unexpected, which is not number. And we are getting a results here, not a number. So how it is used to be solved in the previously. So now in the new syntax, we directly give the default parameters over here like this. So if I just mention equal to 0, this is a new syntax. But in the older one, before ES6, number one, so let's do a quick validation and use a ternary operator here. For example, if there is something inside the number one, so let's use it, no problem. But if there is nothing inside that, let's use 0. We'll do the same thing for number 2 as well. If there is something inside the number 2, let's use this or use the 0. Let's apply the prettier. So now we are really sure this particular number 1 and the number 2 will have some value. It cannot be undefined. It will not be empty. So in this case, when we are passing only one, the second parameter is holding undefined. So when it comes here undefined, so it will not take the current value undefined. It will go and take the 0, and the value inside the number 2 will be 0 for us. And the number 1 is super simple. So we are having some value here. So it will go and take the respective, the same value which is present inside the number 1 parameter. So finally, we are getting here 1 and 0. So output will be 1. Let's see. So this is how the developer used to write some manual code. So to take care the default parameters or the missing parameters behavior. So we are going to see much more details on this in the upcoming lectures on the array-like object for the arguments and many more functionalities. Let's try to understand the default parameters in ES6 onwards and in the next generation JavaScript. So the default parameters are much simplified in the next generation JavaScript. So earlier we have seen some example how the developer used to write the custom code to perform some validation or maybe to have a default values to their parameters of the function. So now instead of writing this custom code, so in the version 6 onwards, we can directly mention here the default parameters as we do in other programming languages. So now even if the value is given, it is okay. If not given, it will consider 0, and the same applies to the number 2. So now here in our case, we are just passing the value 1 here. So the second should be treated as 0, and we should get an output 1 in this case. So let's see. Yes, we are getting. So now we'll also try to observe what will be the values in the different case if we won't provide any default parameter. So now in this case, let's say I'm removing the default parameter for the second one. Let me just copy the code and perform one more variation here at the bottom. So I don't want to give the default parameter for the second one. I'm expecting here the default parameter only for the number 1. So by looking at this code, what you will what's a normal scenario? What could be the output that you think? I'll just take a pause here so that you can think on it. Yes. So in this case, there is one already default parameter available. So we can consider the one that we are passing that will be assigned to the number 2 directly, but that is not the case here. If that could be the case, our output should be 0 plus 1, and we should be getting 1 here. But if you just look at the output in this case, we are getting NaN, not a number. So what's the reason behind that? So these default parameters, when you're mentioning and when you're giving the parameters, when you're calling the function, it is started getting assigning to the respective parameters directly starting from the first parameter. No matter you're giving a default parameter or you're not giving a default parameter. So in this case, if you want to give any default parameter, always we should keep a practice to give the default parameters from end to start. Because if you give the default parameters in the start and later you are expecting to have the compulsory parameters, so that will not serve you the benefits of the default parameters here. So in the same situation here, if I make the default parameter equal to 0 in this case, so now what is the one I'm passing? That is going to the number 1. I'm not passing the number 2. So of course it will consider 0. And in this case, we should get the expected output. So what we learn out of this, always the default parameters should be at the end of our function parameters. And after that, there should not be any compulsory parameters. Let's say if I want the third one, I should not do this. And even if I do, so for that also I should give some default parameters, then it will make sense. And in this case, let's say I'm ready with my second parameter, so I can give that. So now instead of this 3, 0, it will be assigned here 3. And let's see the outcome, we should be getting 4. So this is how the default parameters work and the sequence matters with default parameters. One more thing we'll understand here, let's give both default parameters. So and let me just again comment the code and create a new scenario here. So I want to use both as a default parameters. Let's try to understand the values that we are passing. What's the data type of that? So in this, at this time, now I'm not interested in the calculation. I'm more interested in the number 1 and the number 2. What are the values we are getting? So we are just passing 1 comma 3. So we should getting perfectly 1 and 3 here. Yes, we are getting it. Line was 16 and the 17 from respective these lines. So now here, let's see instead of this 3, I'm giving a null here. What will happen in this case? I'll just take a pause for a second so that you can think on it. Yes, what will happen? When I'm giving some value here, I'm not keeping it empty. I'm giving some value here. So now it will treat this number 2 as a null or it will use its default property. That's an interesting scenario. So let's run the program and see. We are getting the null. It means even though we are passing a null, that's a some value. That is holding some value. Even if we are passing a null, it means there is some value which may be empty. In this case, it's null and empty. So it will not use the default parameters. Let's consider the second scenario. In the second scenario, what I'll do, I'll pass undefined. So what I mean by undefined, what's the core meaning of undefined? The core meaning of the undefined is we don't have any value to pass. We are mentioning we don't have any value. So in this case, if you just save your code and run the program, we are able to see the default parameter is coming into the picture because we are passing the undefined. So here is a difference between null and undefined you can figure out when working with the default parameters. Let's also work with few more interesting scenarios here where you can just try to get the output on your own to understand how things works. So let's see, both I am giving the empty strings here. What will happen in this case? So it will ignore this or it will treat it as a value. So let's save the code and see. Yes, it is having some empty strings here that is not visible on the that is not visible here to us, but it's an empty string here. If we want to see that, I guess if we do the length, we should be getting 0. I guess it should be working. Yes, we are getting the length 0, 0. It means we are getting some string here, which is empty string. So even if you're giving an empty string, so that's perfectly okay. That's some value to us. And in that case, the default parameters will not be used. So with this, we understood the default parameters only use when we are not passing a value or maybe we are passing undefined. And undefined means we don't have any value with us to serve. That's perfect. Let's go with the next scenario. In the next scenario, we'll try to use the parameters inside another parameters. Let's say we want to create a function, let's say hi, and it accepts two parameter. Firstly, for example, it's a name of the person, for example. Yeah, I'm following the camel case. And after that, a message. So here, I'll just console this message. And from here, I'll try to call say hi. I'll give you my name. And the message I'll say like hello. Let's see the outcome. Yes, we are getting it very well. Hello from the line number 26 from over here. So now here we are saying hello, but the welcome message should be also including the name of the person. So I should be making it hello Navin. So this time it's good. But we are already mentioning the name here. Why again we are mentioning it here? Can't we reuse it and do some work over here itself? Yes, of course we can do that. So if I want to do, what I'll do into this particular message, here itself, I can append it with my name called first name. And let's see the output now. Yes, we are getting a very perfect greeting. Hello, Navin here. But in JavaScript, the parameters will also provide you some functionality where you can access one parameter while assigning or maybe inside another parameter. Let's see how. So in this particular second welcome message, if I want to use the first parameter, first name, so what I can do, generally we write a default value or default parameter like hello, hello. And here, so this is a normal scenario. If you're not mentioning this, if you're not mentioning this, so by default, the message will be hello and we are using it. And let me just also remove this to make it more simple. So it's a simple function which is having one default parameter, hello. And after that, we are just consoling it. And here I'm not passing the second parameter. So by default, it should print just hello. Perfect. And in the second case, let's say for one more person here, I want to give the custom message like hi. Getting it. So in second time, what is the customized we are giving that is being used, and in the first case, the default one is getting used. So what I can do here, I can use the first name parameter over here itself. That might a weird syntax looking, but it's super simple. We are just having two parameters for our function, first name and the hello. Let's ignore this complete part. Super simple. What we have done initially, we are just using a default parameters that we have learned till now. Additionally, we are just making use of the first parameter called first name. That's it. So now from now onwards, if I'm not giving the greeting, so it will be using a default greeting hello. It will also attach the name of the person automatically. So let's see how it's work. So in the first case, it is working very well and we are getting hello Naveen. There is a small problem here. We should be having a space in between the two words that we can do here. Yeah. So in this way, we have learned how to make use of the default parameters and making use of another parameter inside the second parameter. Now, let's also try to understand the destructuring process by using some default parameters. So let's write a function here. We'll say on add, for example, here. And generally we gave number one and the number two, right? So let me just write the default code once before we move ahead. So let results number one, number two, which is a quite common code we have written till now. And let's call it 1,3. Let's confirm it's working. Yeah, it's working. Now we are passing this 1,3 here in this way. But let's see, we are passing these values inside an array like this. So when we are passing these values like an array, we need to destructure it when we are receiving it over here inside the function parameters. So if I want to do that, I need to mention the square brackets in this way. And here I need to mention the empty array because if I don't have any parameters given from the line number 36, how I should behave for that. So in this case, let's run the program and see everything is super perfect. So what we are giving here by default, if there is no array we are passing, we are saying that, okay, consider empty array. And if you're passing an array, so this doesn't mean, or you can even completely remove that. And here, let's say I'm just passing the number one. I'm not passing the number two. So how to give the default parameters here? So the number two we are not passing. So of course it will be undefined. And if you just want to confirm that as well, log number one, number two, let's see the outcome. Yes, we are getting one and the undefined line number 32 and the 33. So here you can clearly observe the second input is undefined. So if you want to make it some default parameter for that, we can do it here. And now we should be getting 0. That's perfect. In the same way, we can also do over here. That's perfect. And now we can call the on add with different combination. So this is 1 comma 2, this is 1 comma 3. Again, I can call this with an empty array as well because even though it's an empty array, both are having respective their values. So all these function calls are a valid one in this case. So this is how we have seen a detailed overview how the default parameters work in different situations with different examples.